Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, June 30th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will be quite pleasant today, reaching a high of 78.1 degrees and dipping to a low of 62.2 degrees. It is a perfect day to step outside and enjoy the comfortable conditions. On today's program, we will examine the Supreme Court's rulings regarding the expansion of presidential authority and why the justices chose to protect the independence of the Federal Reserve. We will also investigate the deepening humanitarian crisis in Venezuela and the circumstances that have led to such dire conditions. Beyond those headlines, we have several other important stories to discuss throughout the episode. We have a full show ahead, so please stay tuned for all that and more. Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that could reshape how much power a president holds over the federal government. Our reporter, Ethan, has been digging into it. Ethan, what exactly did the court decide?
Good morning, Grace. So on June 29th, just yesterday, the court issued what many are calling a landmark ruling. In a 6-3 decision, the conservative majority said presidents have, quote, free rein to fire agency heads at will, end quote. They declared that protections against removal are, quote, contrary to the separation of powers enshrined in the Constitution, end quote. In plain terms, the president can now remove the leaders of many independent agencies without giving any reason.
That sounds like a big shift. Was there a long-standing rule this overturned?
There absolutely was. The court threw out a precedent called Humphrey's Executor, which had stood for 91 years. It was originally a unanimous decision, and it limited a president's ability to fire board members of independent agencies. The whole idea was to keep critical government decision-making free from political influence. So tossing it out really does mark a dramatic change in how Washington works.
And how did this case actually reach the justices?
It's centered on a woman named Rebecca Slaughter, a former member of the Federal Trade Commission. President Donald Trump had fired her without cause, and she challenged that. According to PBS NewsHour and other outlets, the legal logic here stretches well beyond her case. It extends to several other independent agencies where Trump has also removed board members.
Which agencies are we talking about?
3 big ones come up specifically. There's the National Labor Relations Board, often called the NLRB. There's the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB. And there's the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC. So this isn't just about one regulator. It touches agencies that affect workers, federal employees, and the safety of products families buy every day.
I imagine not everyone on the court agreed. What did the dissent say?
That's right. Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented, and her warning was pretty stark. She cautioned that granting the president such vast power could lead to, quote, submission, instability, and even oppression, end quote. President Trump, on the other hand, celebrated. On Truth Social, he called it a, quote, historic and unprecedented ruling, end quote, and one of the most important ever regarding presidential powers.
Now, I understand the court didn't give the president everything he wanted. There was an exception?
There was, and it's a fascinating twist. In a separate vote of 5-4, the court rejected the Trump administration's attempt to immediately remove Lisa Cook. She's a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and she's the first African-American woman ever to serve in that role. So even as the majority expanded presidential power broadly, they carved out the Federal Reserve.
Who made up that 5-4 majority on the Cook question?
It was an interesting coalition. Chief Justice John Roberts joined with Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the 3 liberal justices. So you had the Chief Justice and a conservative crossing over to side with the liberals on this particular point. That tells you the court saw the Fed as a special case, distinct from the FTC and the others.
Why treat the Federal Reserve so differently?
The court described the Fed as a, quote, uniquely structured, end quote, entity with its own historical tradition. Chief Justice Roberts tied it back to the first and second banks of the United States. He noted that the Fed's role in setting monetary policy and interest rates requires real insulation from political pressure. And that's exactly what Congress intended when it established the board in 1913, giving members limited 14-year terms.
So does this mean Lisa Cook keeps her job for good?
Not exactly, and this is an important nuance. Roberts described the ruling in Cook's favor as, quote, narrow, end quote. It focused on procedure, not the final merits of the case. The court found that under the statutes of 1913 and 1935, Cook was entitled to, quote, notice of the charges made against her, end quote, and an, quote, opportunity to be heard in her defense, end quote, before being terminated.
So it was really about the process, not whether she did anything wrong.
Precisely. Roberts made a sharp point about why that matters. He said that without such procedural checks, quote, for cause protection, end quote, would be reduced to, quote, at-will employment, end quote. In other words, if a president could fire someone the moment he wanted to, the legal protections Congress built in would be meaningless. So the court is forcing the administration to follow the rules first.
Let's back up. What were the actual allegations against Lisa Cook?
The conflict goes back to August of last year, August 2025. That's when President Trump moved to fire Cook based on allegations of mortgage fraud. He claimed she had falsified documents regarding 2 properties that were both listed as primary residences. Cook has firmly denied all of it, and her case has been winding through the courts ever since.
How have her lawyers responded to those claims?
Her legal team has pushed back hard. They've accused the administration of, quote, cherry-picking, end quote, her applications to build a case against her. And they raised a pretty pointed comparison. They noted that 4 of Trump's own cabinet members, as well as Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, submitted similar mortgage applications without facing any similar allegations of wrongdoing. So they argue she's being singled out.
And how is the president responding to losing this part of the ruling?
He's not backing down. On Truth Social, Trump argued that his announcement of the firing on the platform itself counted as adequate notice. He brushed off the court's decision, calling it, quote, strictly procedural, end quote, and he vowed to take further action. So even though Cook prevailed for now, the president signaled he intends to keep fighting.
This feels like it's part of a larger battle with the Fed, is it?
It really is, Grace. There's been ongoing tension between the Trump administration and the Federal Reserve. NPR reports that nearly every living current or former Fed chair signed a brief urging the court to protect the Fed's independence. The one notable exception was Jerome Powell. And it wasn't just former chairs. Various Treasury secretaries and economists from both parties signed on too.
You mentioned Jerome Powell. Wasn't he targeted by the administration as well?
He was. The Justice Department actually launched a criminal investigation into Powell over cost overruns for building renovations at the Fed, but that inquiry was eventually dropped. It fell apart after a Republican senator threatened to block Trump's nominee for chairman, so there was clearly some political maneuvering behind the scenes.
And where does Powell stand now?
Powell has remained on the board, but in a different capacity. He's now serving as a regular governor rather than chairman. Kevin Warsh has replaced him as chairman of the Federal Reserve. So the leadership at the top of the Fed has already shifted, even as these legal fights continue.
So when we add it all up, what's the practical bottom line for these agencies?
Here's where things land. The Supreme Court has upheld the firings at the FTC and those other agencies, the NLRB, the MSPB, and the CPSC. That means the president's expanded removal power is now very real for those bodies. But Lisa Cook will remain in her position at the Federal Reserve while her legal challenge continues in the lower courts. So the Fed stands apart, at least for the moment.
And looking ahead, what should our listeners be watching for?
I'd keep an eye on 2 things. First, whether the administration follows the procedural steps the court laid out and tries again to remove Cook with proper notice and a hearing. Second, how the lower courts handle her ongoing case. This ruling reshaped the balance of power between the president and independent agencies in a big way, but the Federal Reserve fight is far from over. We'll be tracking every development.
Really helpful breakdown of a complicated decision. Ethan, thanks so much for walking us through it this morning.
My pleasure, Grace. Always glad to help make sense of it.
That was our reporter Ethan on the Supreme Court's landmark ruling from June 29th. Stay with us, because we've got more news coming up right after this. We're following up on a story we first brought you last week, the devastating earthquakes in Venezuela. Chloe's been tracking the latest developments. Chloe, where do things stand this morning?
Well, Grace, As we reported Sunday, northern Venezuela was hit by twin quakes on Wednesday, June 24th, magnitudes 7.2 and 7.5. We're now 5 days out, and the news this morning is grim. Rescue teams are starting to shift from searching for survivors to recovery because that critical 72-hour window has closed. The hardest hit areas remain the capital, Caracas, and the coastal state of La Guaira.
Let's talk about the death toll. Has it climbed since we last spoke?
It has, and significantly. According to the Venezuelan government, as reported by the Associated Press via Spectrum News, the confirmed toll has now passed 1,700 people. National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez cited 1,719 deaths as of June 29th. Now, other outlets like Yahoo News and Democracy Now! Are still citing lower numbers, starting around 1,400. The figures vary depending on the agency.
That's a big jump from the 1,400 we reported Sunday. Could it go even higher?
Unfortunately, yes. The U.S. Geological Survey is warning the final toll will likely reach into the thousands, with a substantial probability of exceeding 10,000. That would make this one of the deadliest disasters in the region's history. Beyond the dead, more than 3,100 wounded people have been treated. Many are suffering from severe crush injuries, the kind you see when buildings come down on people.
And the missing. That number was already staggering when we covered this. What's it now?
It's still heartbreaking and honestly hard to pin down. Democracy Now! Reports nearly 50,000 people remain missing, but other data points to an even larger scale. Families reported at least 68,900 missing as of Saturday. And there's a crowdsourced database called Desaparecidos Terremoto Venezuela that listed 62,593 total names, with 52,373 still not located.
A crowdsourced database. So families are turning to each other to find people?
Exactly. When official systems are overwhelmed, ordinary people step in. That database is one example, and there's another digital tool called localizapacientes.com that tracked nearly 3,000 hospital patients across 3 states. People are using whatever they can to reconnect families. It speaks to how communication networks collapsed after the quakes, leaving relatives with almost no way to know if loved ones survived.
Let's turn to the physical damage. How extensive is it?
It's enormous, and the estimates keep growing. According to Yahoo News, authorities confirmed over 770 buildings totally or partially collapsed. But a preliminary NASA assessment suggests the damage is far more extensive, estimating 58,870 buildings were damaged or destroyed. So you've got a huge gap between what's been confirmed on the ground and what satellites are seeing from above.
What about the airports and ports? Those matter for getting aid in.
They really do, and that's a major problem. The earthquakes destroyed part of the control tower at Simón Bolívar International Airport in Caracas and damaged the port in La Guaira. The International Rescue Committee notes the airport damage continues to obstruct the flow of essential supplies. When your main entry points are crippled, everything slows down. Food, water, medicine, rescue equipment. It's a bottleneck at the worst possible moment.
Is the power back on at least?
Partially. Jorge Rodriguez stated electricity has been restored to 90% of La Guaira, which is real progress. But the situation remains fragile. The Caracas Metro was forced to temporarily suspend service on Monday to inspect infrastructure after a series of aftershocks. So even where things are coming back online, officials are being cautious because the ground is still moving.
You mentioned aftershocks. Are those still happening?
Constantly. Since the initial quakes, there have been over 600 seismic events. A moderate aftershock on Monday sent residents of Caracas fleeing into the streets. Interestingly, it was measured at 4.6 magnitude by the USGS but 5.1 by Colombia's Geological Survey. Either way, after what these people have endured, even a moderate shake is terrifying and sends them running.
Let's talk about some good news. Have there been any dramatic rescues?
There have, and they've been a bright spot. Among the survivors are a 9-month-old baby and her mother. There's also Diana Patino and her 18-day-old son, Juan David, both pulled from the ruins in La Guaira. And an 11-year-old boy was rescued alive from rubble in Caraballeda. These moments are why crews kept digging right up to the edge of that 72-hour window and beyond.
We talked about international teams arriving last week. What's the U.S. role looking like now?
The U.S. response has scaled up dramatically. According to the Associated Press and Yahoo News, the U.S. has provided over $300 million in financial support, including $150 million allocated to faith-based groups and 2 UN agencies. They've deployed 300 first responders, that's 150 search and rescue workers and 12 dogs. And they're running 24 C-17 transport planes daily to deliver supplies.
That's a serious military operation. Who's coordinating it?
The U.S. military effort is coordinated by Marine Corps Major General Kevin J. Girard. They're helping with air traffic management and port repairs, which ties back to those crippled entry points we discussed. Essentially, the U.S. military is trying to reopen the channels so aid can actually flow. It's a logistical mission as much as a rescue one.
And the other countries we mentioned before, are they still involved?
Yes, the international coalition has grown. Search teams have arrived from Mexico, Brazil, El Salvador, France, and now the UK and Canada as well. The European Union mobilized €5 million in emergency assistance, and Pope Leo provided an initial donation of €100,000. So you're seeing a broad global response: governments, multinational bodies, and even the Vatican.
What about the response on the ground from Venezuelans themselves?
That's been remarkable. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez reported over 14,000 military and police members are patrolling the area, and the government has set up 15 temporary encampments for the displaced. But some of the most moving efforts are grassroots. Survivors and volunteers, including deported former U.S. residents, have used private cars and motorcycles to rush the injured to hospitals. Ordinary people are filling the gaps wherever they can.
Now there's a complicated political backdrop here. Can you explain that?
It's quite a situation. According to the Associated Press and Yahoo News, acting President Delcy Rodriguez came to power in January 2026. After the U.S. administration of Donald Trump seized former President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, in a military strike. So the same U.S. that removed the previous government is now leading the aid effort. It adds a layer of tension to everything happening.
Does that history affect the relief work itself?
It does, in concrete ways. Even as the U.S. pours in aid, Democracy Now! Has highlighted that U.S. sanctions have impeded some rescue efforts. So there's this contradiction: massive assistance arriving alongside restrictions that complicate it. The politics and the humanitarian need are deeply tangled, and the people caught in the middle are the ones still digging through rubble.
Before we go, how long are officials saying this recovery could take?
This is the sobering part. The Venezuelan Red Cross warns relief efforts may need to continue for up to 2 years. This isn't a crisis that ends when the cameras leave. You've got tens of thousands missing, nearly 59,000 buildings potentially damaged, and infrastructure that needs rebuilding from the ground up. For the survivors, June 24th was just the beginning of a very long road.
A long road, indeed. Chloe, thank you for staying on top of this for us.
Thank you, Grace. We'll keep following it as the numbers come into focus.
Here are some other headlines. Turning to the courts, the Supreme Court has delivered a ruling that keeps the mail moving, deciding that states may count late-arriving mailed ballots. This decision puts a stop to a challenge led by the Trump administration, though President Trump is not exactly stamping this result with approval. He took to social media on Monday to claim he is trying to save America from crooked elections, proving that this legal battle is still very much in the delivery phase. Over in the Middle East, things are getting quite liquid. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian announced on Monday, June 29, 2026, that $6 billion of $12 billion in assets frozen in Qatar will be released. This cash flow comes after a U.S. agreement to lift sanctions on oil and petrochemicals, finally letting the money oil the wheels of diplomacy. However, the communication lines are a bit jammed. While White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt told Fox News that Jared Kushner and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff would fly to Doha for high-level meetings this week, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi told the Tasnim news agency that no such technical working group meetings were on the calendar, though they are still chatting with Qatar. Speaking of tight spots, Iranian and Omani diplomats met in Muscat on Monday to discuss the management of the Strait of Hormuz under the Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding. It seems the world is feeling the squeeze of a prolonged blockade in the strait, as Germany's development ministry has pledged €250 million, or $286 million, to support food security and resilience in Africa and Asia. It is a pricey price to pay for a bottleneck. In other regional news, U.S. Central Command Chief Admiral Brad Cooper met with Lebanese President Michel Aoun and Army Chief Rodolphe Hakel to discuss a framework agreement between Lebanon, Israel, and the U.S. However, the plan has hit a wall with Hezbollah, who have rejected the deal because it asks them to lay down their arms before Israeli troops pack up and leave. It seems Hezbollah is not ready to disarm the situation just yet. Turning to domestic concerns, we are tracking reports that millions of Americans may have dropped their health coverage, suggesting a significant decline in Obamacare enrollment. And in a tragic turn of events in Gaza, reports indicate that children are among the dead, as Israel continues to bombard the region despite a ceasefire deal, proving that the peace process remains dangerously fragile. That is all for these updates. Stay tuned for more as the day unfolds. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.